Hi, I'm Adiba and I'm here today with Bryn Jones. Welcome, Bryn.
Hi, Adiba.
Bryn, you are a drama therapist, a mindfulness-based therapist, and you used to be a Buddhist monk.
Yeah.
I have a question for you which goes right into the heart of, one of the deeper questions that we're asked sometimes by our guests.
Mm-hmm.
Often our guests say that meditation, they bring up experiences that may or may not be entirely comfortable. And in fact, that is the point of meditation, to see what experiences there are.
Okay.
And one of the questions they ask is, how do you know when the experience is getting so uncomfortable that you may want to investigate it further with some help? Or how do you know when you should just be able to sit with the uncomfortable experience? I thought I'd get right into the heart of it.
Yeah. Well, it's good, isn't it? I mean, that does kind of go to the heart of the matter.
Yeah.
I guess, if you think about meditation, we think about like formal meditation practice.
Yeah.
We think about silence, and we think about stillness. And to begin with, for a lot of people, the notions of silence and stillness are quite attractive.
Yes.
A lot of us might think, it'd be nice to have more quiet, it'd be nice to have more space, it'd be nice to be stiller.
Yeah.
But actually, as we start to explore those spaces and as we start to experience those spaces, we kind of find that they don't give us the kind of feeling or the experience or the sensation that we may have envisaged. And in actual fact, silence and stillness we experience often as very stimulating. So, to begin with, when we start to meditate, we might think, okay, I want a little bit more peace, I want to be able to relax a little bit more, I want to feel a little bit more chilled, have a little bit more space in my life. So these start off to be our kind of an initial intention. So we're looking for some relatively swift, pleasurable return on the practice. And I kind of think for most people, if we have, a good enough meditation teacher, and if the methods that we're being taught are relatively authentic, then for most people, in a relatively short period of time, they can get that feeling of quietude, of peace, and some sense of feeling more relaxed and calm.
Yes.
But we know when we think about meditation practice that's not the end of the story, that's not it.
Yeah.
And when we attain those initial pleasurable returns, quite quickly there comes quite a sense that this isn't it, that there's more. That there's more that I can reach for from this space. There's more now within my reach. And I guess that when we get to that space, really, feelings of discomfort are part of the process.
Yeah.
So I think in terms of how we work with discomfort, it's to begin to anticipate it, to allow it, to expect that this process that we're starting to engage with, to some degree, is going to bring us into contact with uncomfortable feelings. So rather than factoring them out,
Yeah.
I think it's really helpful if we can start to work to kind of factor them in.
Yeah.
The reason for that being is that meditation practice really is about change.
Right.
And not just small change, but really in the longer term, meditation practice is about transformative change.
Yeah.
It's about changing how we are in the world.
Yeah.
And of course that process, that experience, that practice is going to involve some degrees of discomfort. It's going to be an uncomfortable experience because we're moving from one familiar to a new way of being. We're having to let go of those familiar patterns, those familiar ways of being in the world, and start to get in touch with something that's altogether new. And whenever we're in touch with something new, then that's, to begin with, that's uncomfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. And is there a point when you think I should see it's getting too overwhelming and I should see someone?
Yeah.
Or should you just kind of think, no, I'm going to stay with this and try to experience it by myself?
I think it's always, it's kind of always important to kind of work within our capacity.
Yeah.
To have a sense of what our capacity is. But it's getting the balance. So on the one hand, in meditation practice, I think in anything new that we learn, if we want it to be kind of long-lasting and developmental and sustainable, a graduated approach is good.
Yeah.
So we're growing little by little. We're not kind of going for the burn, we're not kind of pushing too much.
Yeah.
We're starting to get some sense of some kind of ground under our feet. So that's important, always to kind of be working within our capacity. But there's always this notion as well to kind of, what's the saying, to kind of a little bit to kind of reach beyond our grasp.
Yeah. Yeah.
So to be leaning into our potential, leaning up against that kind of discomfort, leaning up against that, I suppose it's our kind of growing edge.
Right. Yeah.
So there's a bit of a tension there. And for me, I feel, as long as that's done mindfully,
yes,
then that can be safe.
Right.
And I guess it's only when perhaps that is done without mindfulness, when that's done with a kind of a compulsion or an urge, when we feel as if we should be getting somewhere, when we start to kind of have these kind of projections, or maybe starting to kind of push ourselves or become impatient to kind of get more of a fuller experience, whatever that might mean. That's perhaps when it becomes less advisable. That's perhaps when people kind of get into trouble through the force of pushing too much.
Yeah.
If we have a meditation teacher, then there's somebody there, or if we've got friends or people who we meditate with, there's somebody there who we can kind of go back to and check in our experience and reflect together.
Yeah.
But I think if we practice in this way, just growing gradually,
yes,
gently, little by little, but allowing ourselves just to kind of lean into the areas of discomfort, to lean into the new a little bit.
Yeah.
For me, I think that's a safe and a effective way of practicing.
Right. Okay. So it's an intuition and an intuitive knowing that this is safe. This is done within some levels of comfort.
Yeah. That feeling of that bit of us that's kind of disrupted a little bit, or that's kind of rubbed against a little bit, or that just feels a little bit uncomfortable. That's a sign of growth.
Yeah.
That's a sign of something shifting, something recalibrating, changing. So I guess as I'm thinking with you about this, I'm feeling as if, this notion of just being okay with that.
Yeah.
Welcoming that in some way.
Yeah.
Not retreating from it too quickly. Or feeling that, it's uncomfortable, there must be something going wrong. Certainly not that.
Yeah.
But just actually being able to bear, in a sensible way, in a reasonable way, just be able to bear with that slight discomfort. And maybe with the notion, maybe this helps, that okay, something of significance is engaged now. And this discomfort is a sign that there's something happening now, there's some traction. My practice is getting some traction. There's something changing.
Meditation can help us get into our bodies and out of our heads. One of the questions we're asked is, when do I know when I'm too much in my head and not in my body and my heart?
Yeah. One of the first things, I guess, is that notion of just remembering it is helpful to be in our head.
Yes.
And in meditation practice, it's about the integration of all the elements of the self and bringing them into an integrated whole. But in our meditation practice, of course, there are times when it's going to be helpful for us to focus or to accentuate or to amplify certain parts of our practice. And there is this challenge of ensuring that we don't become too too much in the thinking mode. And I guess for most meditators, especially people new to meditation, that's probably the mode that we spend most of our time in, right?
Yeah.
Thinking mode is the space that we're most familiar with.
Yes.
So when we sit down to meditate, I think a lot of people find meditation difficult because it's really difficult to transition from the thinking mode to the being mode.
Yeah.
So to begin with, that's one of the obstacles to meditation, that we're too much in our head, there's too much discursive thought. And it's difficult to find, let alone to access, that less engaged thinking, discursive mode, the being mode. So something for me that helps me with that, I know that I'm too much in my head when I start to project too much into the future.
Yeah.
And when I start to overthink. So when I find myself with too many ifs and whens and hows and whys, or if I find myself taking step by step into the future, and moving further and further and further and further away from where I am now, that future projection just becomes like some kind of fantasy. And it might be internally consistent within and of itself, it might make sense and look good and maybe have something to offer, but actually it's taken me away from my present reality.
Right, yeah.
So they're the kind of signs I look for, overthinking, where the amount of thoughts that I'm having just become a bit of a blur, or when I'm projecting way too far into the future. And at those times, that's the time for me to remember the counterpoint to all of that. And the counterpoint to all of that for me are those things that you mentioned. Our heart, our body, and our breath.
Yes.
Because these elements of ourselves are all characterized by presence. They're all grounded, present, in the now. So at that moment, if I'm able, or when I'm able, to catch myself with those inclinations to kind of overthink or to project too far, that's my practice, that's what I do. It's like, I'm just trying to think there how I kind of do that. I remember when I first started meditating, my teacher used to talk about having this, he used to kind of call it like a little guard in the corner of your mind. He used to say, when you meditate, just try and develop this faculty to be watching from one corner of your mind. And that always really stayed with me, that notion. I don't think it's too good to think about that, because you start to think of our mind as like a cube. But I like the idea of it.
Yeah.
And there's just this kind of little part of your awareness that's just got an overview of where you're going, not just in your meditation practice to start with, but then later on, in your kind of fuller life.
Right, okay, yeah.
Just that watching.
Yeah.
And it's that faculty that I rely upon to kind of give me a nudge.
Right.
When I'm doing this kind of overthinking or projective fantasizing stuff.
Okay.
It's just at some point there's some little voice in the mind that just goes, hey.
Yeah.
And it's just gentle, and it's enough. And then I'll just kind of bring myself back. I'll kind of focus on my breathing. I'll bring my awareness to my body, or something like my heart, my core, my center.
And that's what I was just going to ask you next, is that something around my heart. I think, most people are familiar with talking about, the breath and the body. But when we say, let's come back to our heart.
Yeah.
How would you mean that? How would you explain it?
Yeah. I guess classically in Buddhism, then the kind of the Buddha nature, the essence of our mind resides in our heart chakra, in the center. So even though our mind uses the organ of the brain, there's something about, I suppose, what we call it, like some essential part of our being, some definitive aspect of ourself
Yeah.
is residing in our heart, in our centre. But I think most people have a sense of that. I mean,
Okay.
I think most people can have a sense of that. And especially when people start to meditate, it's interesting is when we start to meditate, we become aware of the dominance of the head.
Yes.
And how we've, I don't know, been conditioned, or our habit has been to kind of think of the centre of our being kind of being located in our head. But in meditation, through meditation practices, just being able to kind of drop down from our head,
Yeah.
I think people quite quickly and intuitively, quite naturally, just through the practice, without it being pointed out too much, just start to find that they have some more energy, more activity going on in their centre, in their heart,
Yeah.
and start to, relate or equate to this part of themselves being the centre of their being.
Yes.
I think it may be that for some people they can access that pretty quickly,
Yeah. Yeah.
and for other people it's going to take them a long time. But that long time is time well spent,
Yes.
just to kind of go gradually, and always kind of honouring the difference, I think, between self-discovery. That the quality, when we discover something ourselves through these methods,
Yeah.
the power of that, compared to just having it pointed out by somebody else.
Sure, yeah. With guided meditations, you're in a group setting, let's say, and there will invariably be people who who have different experiences, and sometimes we hear the silence was too long between the guidance, or the element sections of the guidance, and sometimes it's too short. So when there are long silences and someone learning meditation is finding that it's too long, what would you say to them?
Yeah, this is very difficult, isn't it? Because it sounds like it's the silence that's the problem.
Yes.
It's too long, it's too short, it's too quiet, it's not quiet enough.
Yeah.
The silence isn't the problem. It's what comes through the silence from our side that's the problem.
Yeah.
So of course, we can kind of adapt and listen to that and think about that. But I do think on some level, it's important not to be kind of too sidetracked by that.
Yeah.
The real problem is this underlying discomfort and disquiet within our being. And when we enter, as I was mentioning before, as we enter a stillness, or as we enter a silence, a light is thrown upon that. And a lot of the time, because we live lives of distraction, it's still there, but we're just so numbed or distracted that we don't notice it.
Yeah.
But when we get into the silence, it arises, and it feels like the problem's the silence. The problem's not the silence. The silence is just illuminating the problem.
Yeah. Bryn, thank you so much for being with us today.
Okay, thanks.